Hello, welcome to the Bearded Tits podcast, hosted by me, Jack Perks. Professionally, I'm a wildlife cameraman, but I dabble in podcasting, and each Tuesday we release an episode as I have a chat with scientists, artists, filmmakers, and passionate people all about nature in a light-hearted and certainly not serious way. Hello and welcome to the Bearded Tits podcast. I'm your host, Jack Perks. Now today we've got a fantastic show for you. I have got Elliot Kean from Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust. He's the engagements officer there, and he also heads up the tours of the beaver enclosures at Idle Valley Nature Reserve in North Notts. Now Idle Valley is the largest nature reserve in Nottinghamshire, and it also is home to the largest beaver enclosure in the UK currently. So rather than interview the same 3 or 4 people who always get interviewed about beavers on podcasts, I decided to do something a little bit different and actually go out onto a reserve, look at some of the beaver signs, talk about the beavers there. Some of the concerns, I know a lot of anglers are maybe a little bit worried about some of the things that beavers do, as well as other people's general flooding and whatnot. So we address all those concerns that people might have about beavers and talk about the minuses and the many bonuses as well. But first, let's have a look at buymeacoffee.com and the messages that you people have left. So it's always nice. There have been a few messages, so I'm going to read those out. I just want to say on the sponsorship front, I am talking to someone currently, so I'm tickling them for money. So we may have a sponsor in the very near future, so do please bear with me on that. One of the things I've always been reluctant to do on this podcast is plug too much of my own stuff. So I don't generally, for example, I sell prints, I sell cards, calendars, photography workshops, but you very rarely hear me plug them. I tend to just sort of do the podcast own thing. But considering that I do need to earn some dollars somehow, I might start chucking in the cheeky plug for some of the other things that I do. And that ties in nicely to today's episode, because I also run photography workshops with Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust at Attenborough Nature Reserve. So if you want to do a photography day with me, you can join me at Attenborough. There's tea and cake. I made sure that we got that. And in the near future, I will be running beaver photography days at Idle Valley. We're still working on that. I've also got, don't worry, it's just not going to be me plugging stuff for the whole podcast, just bear with me. I've also got a calendar at the moment, which is a UK fish calendar, 2023, 12 underwater pictures of fish that I've taken. So if you know an angler, a fish naturalist, fish fancier who might enjoy that, I've got a few copies left. There's a link in the description. It's a tenner. And as a podcast offer, I will also chuck in 2 free greetings cards if you buy it from the podcast. So if you just mention, I heard this on the podcast, I'll give you some free greetings cards as well. Perfect for the gift for fish fanciers and for someone that you don't like who doesn't like fish as well. If you want to annoy them, that's always a good shout. Right, let's get to these messages on buymeacoffee.com. Okay, so the first one is from I can't talk. From Paul Parsons, and he's put, "Hi Jack, thanks for the great podcast. Today I am listening to your talk with Jules Howard, but I am way in the future of 2022. That's spooky. I've just bought Jules's book as I am planning a wildlife pond for photography next spring. Good man, Paul. Have a beer and put the change in the mic kitty. Cheers, mate, Paul." It should be buymeabeer.com really, because I don't even drink coffee. But yeah, thanks for messaging, mate. Good luck with your pond. Ponds are fantastic for photography. I'm sure you'll have an absolute ball. And Jules Howard's book on wildlife ponds is the book to buy. If you want to do a wildlife pond, you want some ideas, do get Jules's book. It's absolutely fantastic. Cheers, Paul. The next person has actually donated 3 times, and they've left 2 messages. But they've remained anonymous, so I won't say their name. The first one is, "Cats aren't cunts, they're just misunderstood," was the first message. If you do not understand any of that, it's because a while ago I did a podcast called Cats Are Cunts, and as you can imagine, not too favourable on cats. But go back and listen to it. So that person left that. I replied, because I can reply to you on buymeacoffee.com, "Complicated issue, but can't say I'm a fan of what they do." Left it at that. They then donated more money, which is always welcome, and then they left this message. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the cat debate, because obviously we're here to talk about beavers today and be happy and be fun. And I have literally already done a podcast about cats, and I will be doing another one. Cats Aren't Cunts, the sequel. There will be another one. So I'll kind of save it all for that. But I'll just read this message out, and a quick reply. So they go on to say, I'm no naturalist, but I suspect that any species that may or may not have been tipped over the edge by domestic cat predation would have been pushed to the brink by human activity. Also, who introduced feral cats into the wild? So which species is really to blame? Cat's gonna cat. My own cat was found abandoned and I got him neutered. He is an old and fat now and rarely kills. He has probably only killed less than 20 creatures in his entire life, mostly mice, one frog and a few garden birds. I don't think there are many endangered species in Wigan. The biggest tragedy for me is the outcompeting of the Scottish wildcat by feral moggies. That's my uneducated opinion. I told my cat what you think of him, but he declined to comment. Okay. So, starting off strongly with I'm no naturalist. Good man. Yeah, when you say that anything that would have been tipped over the edge by domestic cat predation would have been brought to the brink by human activity, I don't really understand that. I mean, there are so many creatures that cats kill directly, and yeah, we have a huge impact in the environment, sure, but people aren't going around stomping blue tits or booting frogs out their gardens. So I think cats do have a huge impact, and I don't think that's a fair comparison. You've also put who introduced feral cats. Yeah, we did. It is our fault. 100% it's our fault. Feral cats are descended from desert cats in the Middle East, so they're a non-native species. They shouldn't be here, so they are going to have a huge impact on the environment. So we're to blame. Cat's gonna cat. I really don't like this sentiment, and a lot of cat owners generally go down this route. If I had a Rottweiler and I let it out my front door and it came back with a roe deer every week, I'd be fucking concerned. But because it's a cat and it's a small animal, people sort of put it down to, oh, Tiddles has brought home another little thing. So cats are predators, but they don't need to hunt. They're just as happy not kill. Well, they're probably not just as happy. They want to kill stuff, don't they? So I don't think the whole cat's gonna cat thing is particularly good. You put my own cat was found abandoned and I got him neutered. Yeah, nice and responsible. You've adopted a pet, which I'm fully behind, and you've got him neutered so he can't keep making more feral cats. So that's very responsible for you. I think that's good. You've put he's old, he's fat, and he really kills, which I can completely sympathise with. I'm pretty much there myself. He's probably only killed less than 20 creatures. How do you know that? I mean, 20 creatures he's brought home. Cats don't bring everything home. And also that sentence sort of implies that, well, 20 is okay. What number is not okay? Is 50 okay? Is 100 okay? I don't think there's many endangered species in Wigan. Well, there might not be endangered species in Wigan, but there are still animals that if your cat or anyone's cat hadn't have killed, they would have gone on to contribute to the wider ecosystem. They would have gone on to breed. They would have gone on to feed other animals, which they now won't do. The biggest tragedy for me is outcompeting of the Scottish wildcat by feral moggies. Yeah, and again, I completely agree with you there. It's a real shame. Interestingly, where there are lots of wildcats and lots of feral cats, they don't tend to interbreed because they stick to their own. It's only when you get very few wildcats that they start hybridising because there's not much choice. You've also said at the end, you've told your cat what you think and he declined to comment. If your cat's up for it, I'm more than happy to have them on as a guest on the podcast. We can sit down, we can hash this thing out, we can go to the pub after, we can have a couple of beers, and we can put all this behind us. I just want to say, I might have sounded a little bit harsh when I've been replying to you there. I think that your comment is really well orchestrated. You've not resorted to saying, well, I don't like you because you don't like cats. I thought you've done it very well there. And I've tried to reply as best as I can. I will properly get into it in the next podcast. Like I say, I've spent too much time on this anyway. So just bear with me. And then when I release the next Cats podcast, we're going to go into much more detail. And I've got a guest on who is into cats and into wildlife. So we're going to have a good back and forth there. So if you've got anything that you want me to address in that, then put that down in a comment again, and I'll make sure that we talk about that in the next one. But I appreciate you donating. I don't necessarily agree with everything that you've put, and you probably don't agree with everything that I've put, but I'm sure that we can still crack on and make a nice time of it. Anyway, that was a long introduction, wasn't it? Right, let's get into today's podcast with Elliot Kean as we go around Idle Valley and look for beavers, beaver sign, and just generally go beavangelical. Well, welcome to the podcast, Elliot.
Thank you.
So we're out on the enclosure now, and we're staring at cows.
Yep.
Why have we got cows here?
Well, we're here in the beaver enclosure, and we've got four cows here. They're Old English Longhorns, which are probably not a very familiar breed to most people. They're quite different to the Friesians and not your average dairy cow.
Live up to their name. I mean, those horns are pretty impressive.
Yeah, they're pretty formidable animals, and they can get quite big, especially the bulls, which we don't have in here at the moment. Some of these are quite.
Oh, these are the girl. The
Yes.
girl cow. A cow is a girl cow, but they're the females.
They're the cows, yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So they're quite an amazing animal, but they're quite cuddly, really. They're as close as you can get to the native aurochs that would have roamed Britain naturally, and still have them handleable, and we can do all the things that we need to do in terms of managing them for conservation grazing.
And why are they in the enclosure? What's their job? What are they doing here?
Well, it's the same with the beavers, really. All of these sort of species that should be here in ecology, we call them keystone species. All the things that they would have done, our wildlife has evolved alongside, and everything that they do has a positive impact. So these in particular, they're doing all the things that we would have to do as rangers, conservation managers. They're eating the scrub that covers our shorelines as they would naturally.
Stretch with these horn on his back. That's impressive. Sorry, go on.
Yeah,
That's very impressive.
they use their horns as well to manage the scrub. So they'll pull the scrub down with their horns in the winter to get at the buds.
So they're perfectly designed for this job, basically.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and they create a really nice mixed sward, quite tussocky, a good mosaic of tufts of rushes along those wet shorelines, and then quite short grazed areas where birds like red shank and lapwing will sort of nest on the ground in those tussocks and feed more into the open. But all these sorts of little things that they do, wildlife's evolved alongside, so even down to the dung that they provide and the fur that they provide. And naturally, if we could leave them, the carcasses that they provide as well. These are all things that wildlife's evolved for.
That makes sense. Great. Well, I'm going to let you lead. You can go past the cows first, so if they do decide to poke us with horns, you'll get hit first.
Yeah.
But let's go see if we can find some beavers, shall we? Or beaver sign.
No problem.
So we're just walking through a woody bit. Elliot's sprinting off. Can't wait. No.
Just through this part, and then you'll see it opens up.
Okay.
And this is all beavers doing.
Oh yeah. Right.
So there's quite a lot to see here. So I'll point out some things.
Yeah.
But the first thing to say is that this whole sort of open area in the canopy is beavers, and this was only really a couple of weeks' work last winter that they did, quite soon after they arrived. And then this dense wooded area close to us, it was all like this. So they've reduced this quite a lot, and already you can see it's starting to grow back. So sometimes people think, well, if a beaver's felling trees, what if there's too many beavers and they eat all the trees?
Yeah.
But beavers don't kill trees when they fell them, they coppice them. So you might have heard of coppicing as a woodland management technique.
Yeah.
And obviously beavers were the first.
They're doing the job for you.
So yeah, this is why willow trees have evolved to be like this, and there are lots of trees that beavers favour will coppice as well.
You can see all the sprigs coming out of this willow here, so that's all a year's growth. That's all come up
Yeah,
within.
it is. And what the beavers will do is they'll return to that in time when it's reached the perfect size for them to come back and harvest more.
Right.
So the small stuff they're going to eat, and the really smallest branches with the leaves on, they'll eat the whole thing. And as they get larger, sort of pencil-sized, then they're starting to leave the centre, and they're just eating the leaves and the bark around the outside. Because really, beavers are like a lot of herbivores. They're quite generalist, and they'll eat all sorts of things that other herbivores will eat. So they'll eat grasses, brambles, they'll eat lots of these plants on the land, but really they want to be in or near to water as much as possible, because that's where they feel safe. Their predator in the past would have been wolves.
Yeah.
So that's why they eat in this way. So people would say beavers, sometimes people think beavers eat fish. That's quite a widespread myth.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware that they don't.
Yeah,
they don't eat fish.
That was popularised by the Narnia books. So I always say to people, careful where you get your science from.
Yeah.
But then people also say that they eat trees. That's closer to the truth, but they eat parts of trees some of the year. So during the winter, when food's scarce, they don't hibernate like a lot of mammals. Instead, they move on to eating tree bark and the cambium, the living part of the tree just underneath the bark. So most of a tree, when it's felled, you can see around us, is just left.
But even this willow here that's felled, it's got sprigs, so it's not dead, is it? It's got bits coming out of it. So obviously it's the beaver's gnawed on that willow, but it's not killed it.
Yeah. And this one's it's come down before they've gnawed all the way through, which is quite normal. This one's quite unusual. They've gnawed it right until it's almost fell on them. So small stuff, they will do that. But the larger trees, they'll gnaw it to a certain stage and then they'll leave it and let the wind do the rest because they instinctively know that's safer. But what that means is often they stay attached and they'll take what they need, and then there'll be even more shoots coming off the side of that tree, which benefits the beavers and benefits the tree. But this one just underneath us that's come all the way off the tree is a good example of what happens when they fell a tree. So you can see the stump is there.
Yeah.
You've got regrowth, which has been a bit nibbled by a deer, presumably maybe the cattle in here, but that's coming back from the base. And as they've gone through, lots of what they've been chewing to fell that tree isn't beaver food, so they've been spitting that out, and you end up with these characteristic beaver chippings that are like mulch around the stump.
Okay.
And then this is just left as deadwood then, so they've taken off all the small branches that are good for feeding on and for building, and then they've stripped the bark until it becomes much thicker and less palatable and not worth the effort of digesting. And then this is just left. None of that's useful to them now, so that's deadwood, which is obviously a great habitat for insects and something they've
there's
evolved to do.
Fungi growing all along some of the branches, isn't there? And
yeah,
you can see all that. So it's obviously,
and you can see the water level's really low at the moment. The roots come quite far up these willow trees around us, so the water level will rise, and then a lot of this will be submerged deadwood, which again is a really great habitat for aquatic insects.
Yeah,
and they're
good for juvenile fish too.
Yeah.
So when were beavers last in the UK then, Elliot?
So in Nottinghamshire, we know it was over 400 years. We've got quite detailed records of when they disappeared at what time because of hunting records. So they've been hunted for thousands of years, and there's a few different reasons, really. We know that the last record of beavers was 1789, and we know because of the detail of these hunting records that John Swale was paid 2 pence for a beaver head in Bolton Percy near York, quite close to where there's a beaver enclosure now, a reintroduction project, which is quite nice. But they were hunted for all sorts of reasons. They were hunted for their fur, makes a lot of sense. Their underfur is really dense. They're actually the second furriest animal in the world, so that's measured in fur density. It is, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
I know something. That's good, isn't it?
And yeah, that one makes sense. But it's actually related to the most nonsense act of parliament that I've ever heard of, which was in the 1630s, I think. There was an act of parliament that made it illegal for hats to be made of anything other than beaver fur. So we've got a really strange history with beavers. Another reason they were hunted was meat. And
are they good eating? I'm assuming you've not eaten a
beaver.
No,
I've not eaten a beaver myself.
No. Would you?
I don't know.
Put
maybe in the future when there's lots of beavers, we need to control them without wolves here. But certainly not at the moment.
But they were popular for food, were they?
They were, yeah. But the reason for that, obviously, there's lots of easier sources of meat that you can farm on the land.
Yeah.
So the reason for that one was religion. So it was monks and other Catholics couldn't eat meat during Lent. They could only eat fish. And over time they decided, well, the beavers have got a scaly tail. They must be fish. They have to eat the beavers. And as time went on, both in Europe and over in America as well, they added more and more of these animals. So otters, they live with the fish. And water birds, they're fish. And more of these animals were eaten. But obviously that had a disproportionate impact on beaver populations because they Lent being around the spring, they might have had dependent young or been pregnant females. So that was quite an impact as well. But there's all sorts of reasons they were hunted for castoreum as well. They were a hugely valuable animal. So castoreum is a secretion from their scent glands that they used to mark their territory. And it's quite sweet smelling and musky. So it was used in perfume, it was used in food flavourings, unbelievably.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you know where it comes from, it's the last thing
like
you'd want
the vanilla flavouring for a while it was. Until it was produced synthetically. And there was widespread belief that it had medicinal uses as well. Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of nonsense medicines out there. There was some truth in the beaver castoreum because their favourite tree to eat is willow, and willow bark has high levels of salicylic acid, which is the main ingredient in aspirin. So there is... We don't think that in the concentrations it has any impact, but there's some sort of truth.
But it's not complete rubbish.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were ruthlessly hunted.
But prior to that, they were relatively widespread in the UK then?
They would have been, yeah.
So here in the enclosure, how many beavers have you got at the minute?
We have 8 in the enclosure at the moment. So we have a family group, which is mum, dad and 4 kits. And then we have 2 youngsters. We think they're around 3 years old, but they're quite difficult to age. 1 male and 1 female. And they were unpaired when they were released in November last year into the enclosure. And we're starting to see some signs now that they might be pairing up. Once they pair for life. So we're hopeful that we might have some kits in
fingers
the spring
crossed
next year.
And this is the largest beaver enclosure in the UK, am I right in saying
It
that?
is, yeah. So we're starting to see, as we sort of push for policy to change and we allow wild beavers in the UK, these enclosures are becoming more and more ambitious. So initially they were 2 hectares, 3 hectares, then there was 10, then 40 in Derbyshire, 60 here, and we're really reaching the limit of what's practical. And obviously having a big fence line takes a lot of maintenance. It blocks out other wildlife, although we've got some infrastructure to try and let other wildlife in and out as much as possible. So really the focus now is on influencing policy, and the wildlife trusts have kind of led the way on the enclosures, but even we're saying this is the limit now. We don't want any more enclosed trials. We want to get them out in the wild.
I guess you're only going to learn so much, aren't you? And there's, I don't know how many, I know like Willington not too far away, they've got enclosed beavers, and I know there's a few other places, so it's kind of like you're just doing the same thing in lots of places.
Yeah, what we could have very easily done when we had the Scottish beaver trial back in 2008 is taken all the research from Europe, and there've been over 200 reintroductions in Europe, and all the policy information, and brought them straight into the wild. But at that point we said, it might be different here, and did our own science in Scotland. And then when we came to speak about beavers in England, we almost did the same thing again. We did our own science in England, and now, like you say, we're in danger of replicating science county by county as we're doing these trials. So this project does have science. We're working with Nottingham Trent University to study the beavers here. But that science is very much a case of, this would be nice to know, not let's find this out before we do anything else.
Yeah.
Beavers are one of the most well-studied species in the world now.
Yeah, I bet.
And they're quite new to a lot of people, but for those in the know, we know everything we need to know about what they do.
When you go to continental Europe, they're in Berlin, they're in Vienna, they're in you say beavers in London, people go, oh, that would never happen. But they're in a lot of other European countries, capitals, and they get on pretty well. So hopefully one day. So how hopeful are you that we are going to get beavers back without fences? Obviously recently they've just been granted legal protection in the UK, so I guess the aim one day is to kind of get some clippers and get some holes in these fences. Yeah,
we have a certain number of beavers living wild in the UK now. So we have a wild living population in Scotland that's quite considerable, a population in the west and a population in the east, in Knapdale and Tayside. Then we have a population in Devon as part of the River Otter beaver trial, and they were granted sort of permission to stay officially in 2020. I think it was delayed to 21 actually. And then we've got these unlicensed releases that have popped up over the past few years, but we've had sort of 20-25 years of sort of talking about beavers now. So presumably some well-meaning individuals have put these beavers out, and there was a consultation in November last year from Natural England putting out what they were thinking about wild beavers, and the thinking at the moment is that they will be allowed to remain and breed, and they're looking at potential for licensing for wild release projects. So we're pushing to have that as soon as possible, really, because if we're going to allow them to remain, then we might as well do it properly and have a proper self-sustaining population.
Definitely.
In the right places.
Seems to be the theme, doesn't it, where we love to talk about these things, but getting it done, we just or certain individuals drag their feet a little bit. So hopefully we can get it done. Beavers are, controversial is not the right word, but they do kind of stir up debate, shall we say, with certain things. So I thought it'd be good to try and clear out some of those issues. And I know a lot of people associate beavers with flooding, but often it's actually the opposite, isn't it, with beavers, that they can mitigate flooding, particularly if they're further up a river system.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was just me and Sarah just had a glance at each other. The great white egret flew past as you were asking that question.
I didn't. You should have pointed it out.
It was just straight past. I was about to point it out, it was gone.
No, go for it. Yeah, I keep hearing a Sette's warbler as well. Do you hear that? Like chirping up. So if there's any birds or anything, then just ignore what we're on about and point that out. That would have been lovely to see.
Yeah, but flooding wise, there's a lot of the concerns about beavers are based on sort of misconceptions about what they do. One of them is that they eat fish.
Yeah.
And one of them is, what if they dam big rivers and cause flooding? beaver dams aren't anything like human-made dams. They're not structures that are sort of complete. They do let water in and out. They even let juvenile fish in and out.
They're leaky.
Yeah,
to a degree.
They are very leaky. Yeah, and that's where these projects have come from. With in a lot of places, so projects with the Forestry Commission in the Forest of Dean and Cropton Forest, they are based around flood mitigation, because they obviously own a lot of upland, and there's flooding in those areas, so they're under pressure to try and reduce that as much as they can. And part of that is putting these leaky dams in place. And over time they decided, well, this is just what beavers do, how about bringing them back? So they're really great for flood mitigation. Obviously that water's got to go somewhere, so where a beaver builds a dam, some of that water is impounded behind the dam, and you get localised flooding there, and that benefits the beavers because they want deep water to feel safe. They want a large area so they can reach food near the water, flood some trees, so they can float timber to where they need it, and that makes their life easy. But in the process, they're filtering out sediments and pollution, they're slowing the flow of water off the landscape, so you'll have localised flooding there, but in quite rural areas, in headwater streams. Obviously a lot of our main towns and cities are next to quite big rivers because of the historical benefits, and in those places it's plenty big enough for beavers, so they don't build dams once it's beyond a certain depth and a certain width, because they just don't need to, and in a lot of cases they can't build dams of that scale. So in those headwater streams is where they need to do that modification to get the deeper water that they need. And in those rural areas you might get a corner of a field flooded on a farm or something like that, but better there than flooding downstream in potentially people's homes and millions of pounds of damage. So with the new subsidy system coming in, elms, there's worrying signs with the new government that's going to be scrapped, but there's been talk of this for a while now, so hopefully it won't be scrapped, because there's lots of work has gone into this, and the wildlife trusts have been involved in pilot schemes. So with that system, rather than being paid subsidies for owning agricultural land, instead you'll be paid public money for public goods. That's the mantra. So things like flood mitigation, landowners will be paid for that, and obviously water quality improvements and things, and carbon sequestration that beavers are really great at as well. They'll be paid for that. So you get that localised flooding, but downstream the benefits are huge, and not only do they prevent flooding by slowing the flow of water, in that way they also mitigate drought as well.
It's going to make kind of wet meadow habitat and things like that, which will stop drying up as much. So presumably if you live by one of these headwaters and a beaver's causing a dam near populations, there'll be action plans in place to stop it causing any issues for people who live there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's some roles being put in place now in Natural England and the Environment Agency, and there'll be people to call in the know, and we'll kind of get used to these animals being around again and what we need to do. But yeah, there will be that sort of hierarchy of action, and the first one will be, well, can we just tolerate them doing what they do? Because if we try and mitigate what they're doing everywhere, then it'll cost a lot of money and we won't get the benefits of flood mitigation and things. But in places where we can't allow them to do what they do, then there are some really simple mitigation techniques. So for things like dams, what you have is you have flow devices, so you can have a pipe through the dam, a cage on either end underneath the water. So we know that it's the trickling sound of water that triggers beavers to fix the dam. And we know that because scientists put out speakers playing the sound, and they piled on mud and sticks onto these speakers.
Oh, really?
So quite a nice simple experiment. But what that means is that with the pipe underwater and caged, the beavers don't feel the need to fix that dam. And it means that you can maintain the water level within an acceptable threshold, but the dam can remain and the beavers can remain. So they're called beaver deceivers sometimes. So there's that one's quite a complicated one for dams, but there's lots of things people worry about. Certain trees being eaten as part of conflict with beavers, and individual tree protection is really easy. It can be a sandy paint mix or a wire mesh around those trees. But the main thing to say with beavers is that we know from studies around Europe, if you average everything out, about 98% of the conflict with beavers is within 20 metres of the watercourse, and 90% of the conflict is within 10 metres of the watercourse. So all you need with beavers is these buffer zones along watercourses, and you've got hardly any of the conflict. So the first thing to say is, well, is the tree that you're concerned about within that?
the Beaver Trust did a film recently about buffer zones, it's a free. I'm slightly biased because I featured in it, but it's a really good film. That's all about buffer zones,
Yeah.
and that's well worth it. I'll put a link to it in the description if anyone's interested in that. But that was talking about how important buffer zones are for rivers in general, but also kind of beavers.
Yeah, with or without beavers, it's a smart thing to do with limiting runoff and creating habitat corridors and all that kind of thing.
My kind of interest is fish, as I'm sure a lot of people will know, and I know certainly among a lot of anglers they get a little bit worried about fish migration and how some of these dams, particularly in the headwaters, might affect spawning success of things like salmon and trout. So I wondered if that's anything that you've kind of come across. Like, is there any studies to show that particularly salmonids are affected by beaver dams, or is it not as big a worry for people who are quite keen on their fish like me?
Yeah, it's not as much of a worry. It's certainly a much more reasonable worry than sort of eating fish or damming big rivers that we just know for sure there's no issue there at all. So there have been studies on it as part of the Scottish beaver trial. There was lots of study around it there. That was a big concern in Scotland. And yeah, the thing to say is they've evolved together, and there were certainly a lot more of these migratory fish when the beavers were around and we weren't. But they are, the dams are semi-permeable, so the juvenile fish can move through them. And then in high flow, when the water's coming over the dam, those fish can jump over the dam, same as they would with natural falls in rivers.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of study around it. But the main thing to say is it's a net positive impact, and yeah, they've evolved with each other. Some of the best sort of salmon rivers in Norway are the ones with the most beavers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know just from speaking to other people saying the beaver dam's obviously great habitat for the juveniles to hide from predators, and there's lots of food there for them and to get out of floods and things like that. So I think it's probably naive to think that there's no effect to fish migration, but is there a big enough effect that it's going to cause numbers to decline? I would probably say not. No. And I think the positives will outweigh any major negatives. Would be my opinion. And which kind of brings me on neatly to the next bit, which was, are there any other kind of ecological benefits of having beavers? Because they are just this engineer of wetland landscapes, aren't they? Yeah,
they're amazing really. All the little things that they do have an impact. So it's really hard to summarise.
I know, and we have already talked about a few, to be fair.
So they've got obviously there's the deadwood, there's the clearing of these areas. So this sort of clearing that we're in at the moment, they've moved on to another area now. We've got quite a few beavers in quite a large area, so they've moved on to another area. But as we get more beavers in the landscape, they'll be able to maintain open areas as they coppice the willow and this reed bed around us. The idea, particularly in here, is that as they manage this similar age scrub that's really tricky for us to keep on top of, that'll let more light in, especially along the shorelines, and we'll have more reed bed, which is a great habitat it's nationally important, but particularly important in Nottinghamshire as well. Great for warblers in Britain and
we've heard the setties today, haven't we?
So there's the deadwood, there's the habitat modification. They thin out the canopy around those riparian areas, really great for bats. They create standing deadwood as well, which is a great habitat by ring barking trees. There's some debate, and we can have a look at some signs later on, about whether they sort of know what they're doing, or whether it's just instinct, because there seems to be some sort of, whether they can forward plan or whether it's chance. There's a bit of debate, because
planning
they do
beavers,
ring bark trees, and that means that as that tree dies, it might be particularly big and difficult to fell and not that useful to them, or it might be an unpalatable species. But if they ring bark them and kill the tree, as that declines, it lets light to the forest floor. They get much more of that young herbaceous growth and young trees that is more useful to them. But that standing deadwood is a great habitat.
So lesser spotted woodpeckers, I think they favour that for nesting, don't
they?
So.
And we're finding that willow tits are doing really well in these areas as well. So they seem to be quite closely associated with beavers. But we're finding a lot of those associations. So another one, another critically endangered species is water voles. And if you sort of looked in a textbook or spoke to someone about what habitat you need for water voles, it would be sort of around 1 metre deep, around 0.5 metre wide, channels, free of woody vegetation, nice herbaceous plants, lots of light. And then if you see what a beaver makes in terms of canals, well, it's about 1 metre deep, 0.5 metre wide, free of woody vegetation. So we're finding lots of these species are really adapted to live with beavers, and they're just clinging on in other habitats that suit them better.
Have you got waterfalls on site? Are there any waterfalls here?
We haven't found them in here yet, but
No.
when we set up the project, we were thinking about doing a sort of joint project and having waterfalls in the enclosure as well.
Oh, okay. That'd be brilliant.
And we're still looking into that.
Yeah, historically they were at Idle, I think, weren't they? I'm pretty sure they
Yeah.
were not that long ago.
Yeah.
It's just, take your pick of reasons why waterfalls are declining.
Yeah, we do have American mink here,
Yeah.
which is the main problem here. So it would be a case of trapping American mink out of the enclosure,
Yeah.
and then we could have a project in here
Oh, brilliant.
to get a good population.
Get everything back. Let's go for it. You've also got beaver tours. So if people want to come and see the signs of these beavers or potentially see a beaver, that's something that Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust is running courses on.
Yeah, so we have a couple of types of tours. At the moment we're running the beaver enclosure tours, so they're in the daytime, and you can come into the enclosure, we'll talk about beavers and what they do, we'll have a look at the project and the sort of habitat that they're in, and then we'll walk around and we'll look at some of the field signs and what the beavers have been up to. So tree felling, you'll see debarked sticks and some digging. We're looking around for lodges and things that they're building. And then later on, next year, we're hoping to launch beaver watching tours. So as I mentioned, this is a really big enclosure, so we're trying to find where the active lodges with camera trapping, mainly just finding out where they're active. And once we've found that, beavers are really creatures of habit, so we'll find out what sort of time they emerge from the lodge, set up a bit of a regular viewpoint, and then there'll be beaver watching tours coming up as well that we'll do at dusk.
So pretty unique opportunity. And what do they cost? Or what do the current tours cost?
The beaver enclosure tours are only £15.
That's
Per
bargain.
person. So it's quite a unique experience for that, yeah.
That sounds great. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd definitely recommend it, like, just to kind of see, how often do you get to see a tree that's been nibbled by a beaver or an old lodge or something? It is absolutely phenomenal. But that was really interesting stuff, so thanks for that, Elliot. And should we go and have a look at some more beaver signs?
Yeah, let's do it.
That was Elliot Kean. Absolutely fantastic to see the enclosure, see some beaver signs, some really fresh beaver sign as well. And hopefully I'll go back one day and get to see some beavers. I think it's an interesting topic, and certainly coming from the fish perspective, not like me, I think beavers, the good will outweigh the bad in most cases. When you look at some of the more wild rivers and the larger rivers, like my local River Trent, I think beavers would be fine there. They're not going to cause too much of a problem. When you look at these small chalk streams in the south of England, that's going to be interesting, because one of the common arguments is that beavers and salmon have co-evolved over millennia. Yes, they have, but they've not co-evolved in the rivers that we have today, because our rivers are so canalised, and we've dramatically, since Roman times, we've changed our rivers. So these small chalk streams, which are already under a tremendous amount of stress, if beavers are added to the mix, it's going to be interesting. I'm not saying I'm against it, I'm just pointing out potential problems, and we'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell indeed. Now, if you want to help the podcast and you want to donate, you can do so via buymeacoffee.com. And you can donate £5, £10, however much you want. And you can do it anonymously. You can leave a message. So if you leave a message, I'll read it out in the following week's podcast. So do please do that if you want to help support it. We are currently running a microphone fund. So I'm trying to raise money to buy a new microphone. And currently, I have a look at my dashboard. We are 74% of £500. That's how much I need. So we're quite a way already. It's only 3 episodes in. So if you want to donate, help me get those new microphones, please do so. Next week, I've got Michael Walker, who also works for Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust. But we're not beavering. We're after another mammal beginning with B, bats. I've been wanting to go bat detecting for years, and I managed to convince Michael to take me out, and we go to Ploughman's Wood, where we go surveying bats, and then afterwards we go to Collitt Country Park and we take the bat detector and we get to hear some bats. Absolutely incredible experience, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy it. This has been the Bearded Tits Podcast. I've been your host, Jack Perks, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Cheers.